So what is Waldorf education? Well, basically, it's a global movement, and it was founded in 1919 by Rudolf Steiner. And it was started in Stuttgart, Germany. It centers on the development of the whole child. So they might say thinking, feeling, willing. We might say intellectually, emotionally, and physically. It can also be referred to as head, heart, and hands. So there's over 1,200 schools in over 75 countries. And less known here than things like Montessori, but it's one of the more established independent educational models in the world. So the approach integrates the academics with arts, movements, play, and practical work, all calibrated to the child's developmental stage. So, as someone who has been involved with Waldorf education for many years, I think I'm bringing some professional insight and personal experience to this overview, full disclosure. I personally have seen firsthand how Waldorf's unique rhythm, sensory richness, and relational continuity can support healthy development, identity formation, and resilience, most especially in the early years. I think for you as graduate students in counseling, Waldorf offers, in this class, I should say, Waldorf offers a living example of an educational model that I think aligns closely with the developmental theories we study. So, from Erickson's psychosocial stages to Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems, it also, I think, exemplifies many. I've seen this firsthand. I personally believe this. It exemplifies a lot of the protective and reparative factors we may aim to cultivate in children with histories of trauma, insecure attachment, or early adversity. So, this makes it not only, I think, academically relevant, but also professionally important. So, what does Waldorf believe about child development? So, I think it aligns, I it does align its curriculum to three major developmental stages. So 0 to 7, it sees learning through imitation and sensory experiences. We're going to revisit this when we do biography work later in the semester. Ages 7 through 14, learning through imagination, beauty, and feeling. Ages 14 on, development of abstract thought and critical reasoning. So this maps directly onto Erickson's psychosocial stages, that early trust and autonomy, 0 to 7, industry, 7 to 14, and identity, 14 to 21. So it also resonates with Marsh's model of identity exploration during adolescence and Bronfenbrenner's microsystem, where homeschool alignment is critical for resilience. So, how does it support early childhood? Well, Waldorf classrooms are really different than other early childhood programs. They really prioritize play, rhythm, and very sensory rich environments. So, teachers use a slow, predictable pace with very warm, nurturing atmospheres. And academic instruction is delayed. It's not present here in favor of physical and emotional development. So, for me, the developmental link is I believe that this reduces toxic stress, promotes secure attachment, definitely enhances self regulation. I think, provides a protective factor for children with trauma histories or ACEs. And again, it supports Erickson's stages of trust, autonomy, and initiative while also reinforcing executive functioning and resilience. My kiddos in this picture, can you guess which one? So, what makes Waldorf unique in how it teaches? So, subjects are taught through storytelling. I mean, particularly in early childhood and early elementary, storytelling, movement, and music and visual arts. Um, Social learning is emphasized through collaboration and peer continuity, and older students engage in independent research and mentorship relationships. So the developmental link, this is an education that engages the whole brain. It builds a lot of emotional literacy. It really does foster intrinsic motivation. I think it promotes Erickson's industry stage and supports trauma recovery by engaging somatic and emotional memory and supports identity exploration. So, how does it use play? So, play is not seen as downtime, it's the main vehicle for learning in early childhood. Children engage in 60 to 90 minutes of free play sessions minimally each day with open-ended natural materials and minimal adult interference. So free play from a developmental stance, free play enhances executive functioning, emotional regulation, and language development. It helps children process stress and build autonomy, especially for those with early trauma. And again, it supports Bronfenbrenner's microsystem health and Erickson's stage of initiative. I want to just say, though not represented on this slide, that there is space for being outdoors, for play that continues beyond the early childhood. There is an outbreath, there's a real linkage to how the curriculum is structured, which classes happen towards the end of the day. We could talk more about that. So, how does food connect to development? In this case, children are eating organic seasonal meals, especially in the early childhood. It's prepared on site and served family style. Um, they often help with cooking and cleanup, and like not often, it is part every week. They make soup together, they make bread together. Um, so they're really creating a ritual and rhythm around food. It's also offering interpersonal connection, routine, and body awareness. And for children from neglect or food insecure homes, I think this offers emotional nourishment. It supports trust, safety, and predictability, central to trauma recovery. Although referenced here briefly with the seasonal menus, one of the nice things is that the kids do go outside every day, and where appropriate, depending on the context, of course, where the school is situated, they may forage is a strong word, but they may collect food along the way and then actually integrate that into the cooking. So you'll notice if you ever go into a Waldorf classroom that the toys are very simple and they're made from natural materials. Always, there's no plastic. So it's like wood, wool, and silk, and they're intentionally open-ended and often handmade. So these toys really support sensory regulation and symbolic play, allowing children to process internal states, and they reduce overstimulation and promote imagination, key for trauma healing and narrative reconstruction. So I don't have a picture of a doll, maybe I'll plop one in, but the dolls usually don't have a fixed expression. So it's very interesting. We could talk about that as well. So how is imagination fostered? Well, children are engaging in storytelling based play that recreates characters and themes from fairy tales and seasonal stories. The classrooms, especially in the in the kindergarten, are mixed ages. So there's I could talk more about that, but there's two different age groups in the classroom, which allows for peer mentorship. Um, I think this type of imaginative play also supports language development, social collaboration, and emotional processing, especially important for children processing grief, fear, or trauma, and it supports Erickson's stages of initiative in industry. So they delay reading. So formal literacy instruction typically begins around age 7. The earlier years build pre-literacy through stories, songs, and movement-based phonemic awareness. I firmly believe that this respects brain development and avoids labeling or shaming for children who are not ready. It really supports confidence and self-esteem and long-term reading comprehension, reducing school-based trauma and performance anxiety. Um, I know what you're thinking, but doesn't this delay them academically? No, it doesn't. We could talk more about that. And it also really develops and fosters a love of learning that I've seen completely stamped out of kids in other settings. Okay, ideally, we've got in the original model, it was intended that one teacher stays with the class from grades 1 through 8. And the idea was that they build a very deep knowledge of each child and foster a family-like learning community. This isn't always possible, but that was the original intention. So there is a looping, however, that happens for multiple years, if not for the full 8. And this long-term attuned relationship, I think, provides relational security, essential for children with attachment trauma. So again, it supports Erickson's psychosocial growth, especially in the middle school years. So How is the curriculum delivered, right? So there are these things called main lessons. So every morning, students dive into a 1.5 to 2 hour main lesson, and that explores one subject in depth for 3 to 4 weeks, and then it switches. So it's usually combining art, movement, and some type of narrative. So this structure mirrors how long-term memory is formed. It minimizes overstimulation, and it supports children with attentional challenges, trauma histories, and executive functioning delays. Um, Again, we could talk more about that. So, what makes the learning immersive? I think students experience subjects through hands-on projects. They're drawing, there's dramatization, there's movement. It's not just lectures or worksheets. This multisensory learning supports retention, emotional regulation, and makes abstract ideas embodied and relational. And it fosters meaning making, which going back to trauma because that's the topic, but I think this is key in trauma recovery and identity formation. So instead of textbooks, students create their own textbooks. They're called main lesson books. This is particularly true in the, I'd say, up until about middle school. They keep making the main lesson books through 12th grade, but they of course supplement with textbooks at that point. But these ideas of these main lesson books is that the kids are creating their own textbooks, which are their written summaries, drawings, and reflections of that 3 to 4 week block that they're studying, and they become these beautiful artifacts of their learning journey. And it really builds executive function, pride, a sense of ownership. It mirrors Marcia's identity achievement. It encourages reflection, commitment, and self expression. So, what do the classrooms look like? They feel more like homes than institutions. There's a certain color schema, but there's the colors are usually are if not usually are soft colors. Um, the furniture is wooden. There's warm lighting. You would never see fluorescent lights. There's a lot of natural lights, not of natural elements like silk curtains, seasonal tables. Talk more about that. So I think that this is one of the biggest features of Waldorf education because these environments reduce cortisol, they enhance focus, they support psychological safety, and they're really helpful for kids with trauma or sensory sensitivities. Um, Trying to see, yeah, you could see that they use old school chalkboards. You could see one in the bottom right there. So how are the arts integrated? I said the arts were important. So they're embedded in every subject. There's singing math lessons, painting historical scenes, movement-based spelling. Creativity is central to how all children learn. Um, there's also separate art classes, which I'll go into in a separate slide, but arts in this case support emotional expression, neuroplasticity, and right-left brain integration. And it's vital for students, again, for children healing from trauma or forming a coherent identity. What's handwork? This is where in this educational model, students knit, sew, garden, and do woodworking throughout their education. And these activities develop fine motor skills and patience. Hands-on work grounds students in their bodies and creates a sense of mastery and agency, which are protective factors against learned helplessness from trauma. So, Waldorf education discourages screen use before age 7 and limits it through age 14. It introduces it more intentionally in the high school, and instead, emphasis is placed on real world interaction and creativity. So, limiting screens protects language development, attachment, and mental health. It fosters interpersonal attunement and avoids early overstimulation, especially beneficial for students with ACEs. So I just want to talk about the materials. Again, as I mentioned, the furniture is made of natural materials like wood. Everything is beautiful and intended to inspire care and respect. Um, it really does support that sensory integration. It's calm. It's really connected to the natural world. That physical environment reinforces safety and grounding. I've seen kids come into these schools from other environments and it immediately calms them down. It immediately feels good. You walk into these spaces and it just feels like you're enveloped with nourishment. I don't know how else to explain it. So there's a spiraling curriculum. Subjects are revisited in greater depth over the years. So, for example, a third grader may hear Norse myths, Norse mythology, and then revisit them later as archetypes in high school. So this matches, I think, how we build meaning over time, and it allows students to deepen understanding as their cognitive abilities mature. And this method supports longitudinal identity integration and trauma reprocessing in safe, layered ways. So, why is nature so central? Well, daily outdoor time, nature walks, gardening, and seasonal festivals are woven into Waldorf life, and children go outside in all weather. Nature supports stress reduction, attentional restoration, and somatic regulation. Again, it reinforces Brenner's macro system, helping children feel connected to the world and themselves. And yes, this does happen here, even in New York City. Um, there are several Waldorf schools in the metropolitan area. There's one in Bed-Stuy. There's an early childhood program in Alphabet City in the East Village. There's one of the oldest ones in on the Upper East Side. And then there's one in Spring Valley in Rockland County. Those are the closest ones. Oh, there's also one in Garden City on Long Island. So, what makes Waldorf powerful for development? I think if that hasn't sort of already come through, it's that integration of the arts, nature, rhythm, movement, and those long-term relationships. It's truly a holistic model of education. I think it really supports healthy identity, attachment, regulation, and resilience, key outcomes in lifespan and counseling practice. And it reflects, um, I think, the very best of developmental psychology and narrative repair. So, Waldorf education, in closing, I think for me is deeply inspiring, developmentally attuned. I think it resonates with a lot of our goals as counselors, fostering attachment, creativity, self regulation, and resilience. And as professionals who support diverse clients and systems, it is important to examine the broader context in which any model operates. So, engaging with critiques allows us to understand where adaptations may be needed, especially for neurodiverse learners. Although I would say neurodiverse learners actually do well in Waldorf schools, or students from marginalized communities. So, doing so doesn't diminish Waldorf's contributions. Instead, it helps us thoughtfully translate its strengths into the settings where we serve, whether in schools, clinics, or homes. Um, so we want to hold space for both admiration and inquiry. I will say that in the United States, these are operated largely as private schools. There's been a few charter school attempts, largely unsuccessful. I could explain why. But in Europe and other parts of the world, because remember I mentioned it's located in over 75 countries, they're usually public, or a lot of times they're public, so there's no additional cost for attendance.